and welcome back to the channel. Today we're gonna be analyzing and listening to a song by Agatha Christie. And the track in question, let me check my notes, is Chernaya Luna, and I think I didn't butcher the name this badly, at least this time around. And there's a little bit of a piece of trivia regarding me and this track, this band, because I used to date a girl that kind of introduced me to this band, but I can't remember any song by them. So this is kind of a first time me coming back to this particular kind of music. So let's get into it. But before we go, if this is your first time on the channel, I welcome you because here we analyze the music that we love from the perspective of an active musician and professional music producer, but using language that everybody can understand. With that being said, let's get into it. Here we go. So here we go, Chernaya Luna by Agatha Christie.
Черные дела, на небе ухмыляется луна, а звезды будто мириады стрел, ловя на мушку силуэты снов, смеется и злорадствует любовь, и мы с тобой попали на прицел. Я же своей рукою сердце твое прикрою, можешь лететь и не бояться больше ничего. Сердце твое двулико, сверху оно набито мягкой травой, а снизу каменное дно. Смотри.
Okay, sorry for interrupting, but you know the drill. Okay, this is kind of taking me by surprise, but at the same time, it's ringing so many bells in my head because one thing that I was discussing with the Mad Lads in the Discord, which you totally should join because that's actually how this song was decided, or this analysis, I was mentioning to them that I actually kind of remember Agatha Christie from a previous point in my life, but I couldn't recall any form of music from them. Why? Because I think I used to date a girl who happens to be friends with a Russian girl, and she introduced to her Agatha Christie. And later she mentioned the band to me, but just in very casual conversations. I never truly got into listening to her music as deeply as I am right now. So, that piece of trivia aside, the first thing that I want to point out is that this mix and the song itself reminds me quite a lot of those bands that are part of the goth movement from the early 90s that got inspired by The Cure and all of those guys, right? But in this case, we're dealing with something that is a bit more electronic music oriented. And I think it's going to be closer to, and I think it's not necessarily correct, but it's just my personal opinion at this point, closer to electro goth. But you give me your opinions, aesthetically speaking. Now, mix-wise, and so far what I think about the song. That synthesizer that was playing at the beginning, or well, it's not the beginning, basically everywhere, at every point that the synthesizer is possible, or there's a space for it to be part of the composition, you hear it. I'm referring to the one that is moving from one side to the other. And it's very interesting because it's used in two particular fashions. The first one is rhythmical, because he's following a particular rhythmical pattern that is adding movement, and he's playing nicely with the whole percussion set that is part of the track. Because speaking of which, we got some form of drums. It could be a drum machine, correct me, for those of you who are more versed in the ways of production, for at least for when it comes to this band. But also we got some form of acoustic instruments, because I think there is a drummer as well, and some form of tambourine that is very prominent in the mix, loudness-wise. Now, coming back to synthesizer, it's very much following a very steady pattern that I think is programmed, and it's not being played by somebody, okay? And also it's moving from one side to the other, such as in the following example. So as you can see, by using this kind of stuff, we have access to controlling not only the loudness, but also the positioning of the different instruments across the entirety of the mix itself when working on a track. It has many uses. Some of them are usually to try to make a space or make room for certain instruments to be the ones that should be drawing the biggest amount of attention or to them. For example, the vocals. But in this case, it's being used in a way that it's expanding and adding motion to the entirety of the song, not just for the purpose of making the instrumentation more audible. Okay? So, cool. Now, speaking of synthesizer one more time, because I happen to be a sucker for these things, I love them. I happen to own a few of my own. I think, and I might be wrong, but it sounds quite similar to the sound of an Access, a virus, Access virus, if I recall correctly. It's the one that you got over there on your screen. It's something that was very common during the 90s, especially mid-90s onwards, and if I recall correctly, this album is from 94. So it could be used by Agatha Christie during this period. But tell me if I'm wrong, or if you happen to know which one was used by them, please share it with the Thought Police and the rest of us in the comment section down below. Now, let's continue with the track, because actually, I'm enjoying it. Here we go.
Уже и глазам своим не верь. На небе затаился черный зверь. В глазах его я чувствую беду. Не знал и не узнаю никогда, зачем ему нужна твоя душа. Она гореть не сможет и в аду. Я же своей рукою сердце твое прикрою, можешь лететь и не бояться больше ничего. Сердце твое двулико, сверху оно набито мягкой травой, а снизу каменное, каменное дно. Сердце твое двулико, сверху оно набито мягкой травой, а снизу каменное, каменное дно. Я же своей рукою сердце твое прикрою, можешь лететь и не бояться больше ничего. Сердце твое двулико, сверху оно набито мягкой травой, а снизу каменное, каменное дно. Я своей рукою сердце твое прикрою, можешь лететь и не бояться больше ничего. Сердце твое двулико, сверху оно набито мягкой травой, а снизу каменное, каменное дно. Каменное, каменное дно. Каменное, каменное.
Okay, so there you got it. The guitar tone is fantastic. As soon as the first chords were played, or notes were played by the guitar, I fell in love with it because it's clean, it's not that distorted, but it has plenty of character. It's not just crystalline clean, if that makes sense to you. And also I like a little bit of the effects being used on the guitar. I don't think it has that many, but one of them is of course reverb. It's this one, reverb. But you can tell that it's probably an spring reverb, which is usually the ones that are found inside of amplifiers. Well, depending on which kind of design you're dealing with, right? But they tend to be a little bit more darker sounding, or less, darker is not the word, a little bit warmer sounding, if that makes sense to you, because they have this kind of colorful tone to them, and also they kind of distort alongside the amplifier, creating this beautiful texture that adds plenty of character to the sound of a guitar. It's very easy for you to detect when they apply the built-in reverb on a guitar. Now, there are many things that I would like to unpack. The first one, the vocals. I was having this conversation with some of you once again in Discord, and somebody told me that this kind of music, well, this movement of music coming from Russia, especially the Soviet later Russian Federation stuff that was developed in these years, is heavily influenced by folk music, the kind of stuff that is traditional music over there. And this one, I think, is probably the first track that I can hear it on its entirety. It feels like a traditional song. I can imagine this being possible to be played with just an acoustic guitar and let it roll, right? Why? The structure, even the instrumentation, even though it feels that it's very dense, because it's very packed. There's plenty of things going on at the same time. Could be easily represented with just the vocals and acoustic guitar playing. Why? Because of the whole, the way that the song is produced, or the composition rather. Now, I like the vocals. They're kind of barely singing. And don't take that as an insult. It works for this kind of style of music, and it's adding this kind of personality, and it's something that I'm starting to realize that is very common with these Russian bands from this period. It might be due to the connection with the traditional music, but you tell me in the comments. Now, I mentioned the drums as well before, but something very fun happens in the tail end of the track regarding the sound of the drums, but I will discuss that later because it's time to take a look at the screen and analyze the mix together. Here we go. Welcome to Decibel. In front of us we've got the analyzer, or the program that allows us to be able to analyze music through the use of a visual medium. In this section of the analyzer, we're going to be having access to a visual representation of the loudness of each of the different frequencies that are part of the human hearing range, starting at 20, all the way down to 20,000 hertz, okay? Under 20 is unaudible because it's subsonic. Above 20,000 is also unaudible because it's supersonic, okay? So, in this case, while the track was playing, and I'm actually blasting it through a hefty system I got here with a subwoofer, a very good subwoofer, I was kind of looking for the bass. Don't get me wrong. It's not weak sounding by any means, but you can see that we don't have this huge push forward. And I was expecting that kind of much modern approach to the production or the mix, in this case, due to the moment in which this album got released. At this point in time, we're already dealing with very much hi-fi, audiophile stuff, or records that were already very highly polished. And in this case, I was expecting that this being a much more modern record coming out of this movement from Russia, the album will have these higher production values. And don't get me wrong, it doesn't sound bad by any means. But I was expecting this kind of extra layer of low end because it's part of the sound of these hi-fi productions, right? But in this case, we got mild, not underdeveloped, not undercooked, low end, but it's not gigantic, it's not bombastic. And also, most of the stuff is happening in the mid-range, as you can see. And it's not that harsh sounding. It's kind of interesting because even though I felt that it was kind of overhyped in the higher areas, it's not the case. It's due to the fact that we got not that insanely pushed forward, low end. Interesting, right? And this is the tricky part with audio. It's very much based on perspective. And since I am used to the sound, and most of us are now, used to the sound of modern music production, when we find ourselves listening to something that is coming from a completely different era or using a complete set of aesthetics that are not part of the common stuff that we listen to right now, we usually find sometimes it's either underwhelming or it's surprisingly good because maybe we're tired of the same sound, kind of fatigue in that sense, and or some other times we are so used to one particular sound that whenever we find something different, we don't necessarily like it. That's why some kids are usually problematic when it comes to forcing them to enjoy good music, the older music, of course, I'm talking about. So please force them to listen to good music. Now, let's take a look at the second section of the analyzer. Over here we got the dynamic range analyzer, which is the one that will allow us to see how loud the track was across time. Why? That's very important because it's something that allows us to interpret music in a different way. Why? When something is quieter, it's always much more personal, a little bit more intimate. But when something is loud, of course, it becomes exciting, energetic, and sometimes obnoxious if it's overdone. Okay, sorry for shouting. But now, coming back to this. This blue blob represents the loudness, or how loud the track was at any given point in time. And if we take a look at the very beginning, super quiet, super quiet. And I can assure you that every single one of you who likes this track, every time that you blast this bad boy, you always go to your volume knob to increase the output, because it's kind of quiet, but it's by design. Because see what happens next. Once the song starts to kick in, you see that the volume ramps up dramatically. See the distance, it's twice as loud when compared to the beginning. That's why the choruses hits you so hard, and especially the verse, because actually what we were comparing was the verses rather than the chorus. That's why the first verse feels like monumental and impactful and intense, because the build-up is very cinematic. And I know that's kind of a cliche word, but it makes sense in this case, because the introduction is kind of spooky, kind of evil, kind of ghost-like, and then the rest of the band kicks in, and the fantastic guitar, please tell me the name of the guitar player because that was very good, kicks in and creates this even more intense, darker ambience and atmosphere that makes the song feel much more, how can I put it, well, unique and kind of gothic in that sense. That's probably the reason why I mentioned this whole thing with goth music. But now, it jumps up, it increases in volume dramatically for it to steadily keep the momentum, because there is not that big difference between the choruses and the verses when it comes to the energy, because it's kind of continuous. And that's why I made the reference to folk music, because it kind of has that rhythmical kind of sing-along element to it that is very much reminiscent to that kind of music. And it's interesting to see that everything that has some form of Western, or even Western, European, some form of a European connection, because let's call a spade a spade. It has these similarities, and it's very nice. It's very interesting to always see that. There is something going on, don't you think? But, well, that's me trying to avoid the politically incorrect stuff. But, going back to analysis, you'll see that we got the second section over here, and this is where everything it goes to a different place. Because even though I mentioned that the track is kind of cyclical and kind of continuous, you see how this ramp up in volume. Look what happens in the end. It's insane, the increment in volume. And you can see that it's continuously happening, little by little. And this is the beauty of this. It's done by the mixing engineer in a way that is super sneaky. You don't truly hear it, you feel it. And that's what makes music feel more impactful. That's why I mentioned the importance of dynamic range so much. And see what happens. We got to the final point of the track. And I remember when I mentioned that something fun happens with the drums, it's this section in particular. What happens with the drums, next time you play the track, you will see that there is a particular moment in which they start to become not louder, but they become bigger sounding. Because they are applying the same effect that I mentioned before on the guitar, but in this case, on the drums, reverb, once again. But you heard that I used a completely different reverb. This time around, I think they used some form of a digital reverb because it feels massive and crusty and also detailed, but big. So what happens is that probably during the mixing process, somebody decided, okay, you know what, let's make this section like the drums are now Godzilla level, and let's bring in more of this effect, which usually creates this illusion in our heads of or conveying the images of size and magnitude. And it works. And at the same time, let's make the track louder and see how big it becomes. And when compared to the humble beginning, see how high we are. Check out the intro. It's basically nothing compared to the ending. So, this is a great example, and I wasn't expecting this track to be this good when it came to dynamic range, on how to capitalize on that particular element in music. It's so important because when you are there in front of the live band performing the track, the energy is going to be propelled and it's going to be shared with you from the musician towards in the direction of the audience in intervals, and also it's gonna be done at different points based on the music, based on what is going on the stage. And a good way for the mixing engineer and the recording people to translate that particular emotion into tape is by using these tricks. The first one, movement, and the second one, loudness. Look at that. I wasn't expecting this review to go this nerdy, but there you got it. I liked it. It's kind of ringing so many bells in my head. It's kind of, as I mentioned, kind of reminding me of different times of my life. But yeah, and that's the beauty of music. So please share with the rest of us what would be a good candidate to continue on, because as I mentioned in the introduction, I am aware that this band changed dramatically, and it could be summarized into somewhat or something between 3 or 4 phases, musically speaking. So please, the plan, as I said before, is for me to go or pick one of the a song from each of those different moments, so we can discuss them, and in the end, we can have a conversation on how much a band can evolve and when is stretching too far from the original spot is too far. So that's the question for you. So leave it in the comment section down below. Once again, thanks for joining, thanks for watching, and if you'd like to support this channel, well, the best way to do it is by simply subscribing, liking this video, and of course ringing the notification bell. I know that I'm asking for so much from you, but please do it. Come on, man, it's free. So with that being said, thanks for joining, and as usual, the only thing left to be reminded is that you should never let anybody tell you what to dream about, and remember that I'll see you when I see you.